for Tohajili, for that water system. That's a critical water need that hopefully will get funded through this next cycle of Water Trust Board projects. And in the past, the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project has received a whole lot of funding from the Water Trust Board. So there are other opportunities, and we look for opportunities to support water infrastructure, work with our federal counterparts, especially when we want to leverage some of our state funding with federal authorizations and projects with the Bureau of Reclamation and others, so that we can actually make our state dollars go further. Let me get into the middle bullet there, items, which is the progress on Indian water rights settlements, and that's where the report that you were looking at initially. In 2005, the Indian Water Rights Settlement Fund Act required the state engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission to report by November 15th of every year to the Interim Indian Affairs Committee and the Legislative Finance Committee on 3 subjects. And those 3 subjects are the status of proposed Indian water rights settlements requiring state financing, the distribution of funds from the Indian Water Rights Settlement Fund to implement approved settlements, and the third one is the recommendations on appropriations to the fund necessary to timely implement action of Indian water rights settlements. The first one that I'll talk about is well, let me talk about the status of the proposed Indian water rights settlements. The Navajo Nation, obviously, that's the settlement in the San Juan River adjudication. There's the settlement with the Amet is the Pueblos of Nambe, Powahket, Tesuque, and San Alfonso, which is the Amet adjudication. And then Taos Pueblo water rights is the settlement in the Rio Hondo, the Taos, and the Rio Hondo Abeta adjudication. For each of the 3 settlements, a settlement agreement was executed in 2005 or 2006. That was the last time that I was state engineer under the Richardson administration. And we executed those 3 settlement agreements at that time. So let me get into the individual settlements here, the Navajo Nation being the first one. Back in April of 2005, the Navajo Nation and the state of New Mexico executed a settlement agreement, and that was to solve the claims of the Navajo Nation for use of the waters in the San Juan River Basin in northwestern New Mexico. That settlement provided water development projects for the benefit of the Navajo Nation and also for the non-Navajo communities in exchange for a release of some of the Navajo Nation claims. The Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project includes a pipeline currently under construction by the Bureau of Reclamation. The project will provide a long-term sustainable water supply to 43 Navajo chapters in northwestern New Mexico, the city of Gallup, and the southwestern portion of the Jicarilla Apache Nation. There was federal legislation in March of 2009. The environmental impact statement was put in place in later that year in 2009. And then we had a record of decision that was signed by the Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar, at that time, that same year. And then there was a court approval in November of 2013. The funding piece of it, the settlement cost, there's a total estimated cost for the settlement has now increased to about $1.363 billion based on the Bureau of Reclamation's 2018 price levels for the project. In federal fiscal years 2010 to 2020, Congress appropriated to and provided mandatory funding for the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project, totaling about $868.5 million. Additionally, in fiscal year 2021, the President has recommended appropriations to the project totaling $140.3 million. The state contribution, the settlement legislation required a $50 million cost share contribution by the states toward the project. That was broken down into a cash contribution, which was $13.6 million. It also provided and allowed for a cost share credit. So state had a cost share credit on in-kind services. Reclamation also has preliminarily approved an additional 8.8 million on top of that 13.6 million. So it brings the state's total contribution towards elements of the project to about $41 million. And there's a remaining about $11 million that we think that Reclamation is going to approve up to at least $10 million, which puts the state's contribution to 51.1 million. The good part about that is we're leveraging we're leveraging that amount of money, a little bit over $50 million for a $1.3 billion federal investment.
John?
Yes.
I just wanted to add a couple of things here on the Navajo Nation and the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project
Sure,
for the committee. Just really briefly, I think the state engineer did a good job of saying that from a state perspective relative to cost share, we look to have met our contribution requirement for this, subject to accounting of some of the construction work that has already gone on with state dollars. Within that, I just wanted to alert the committee that next week, the Commissioner of Reclamation will be visiting the Cutter Lateral Pipeline, which is one of the two major pipelines providing water through this project. And that project is in that portion of the project, which is really the eastern checkerboard of the Navajo Nation, and then also a southern part of Hickory Apache Nation, will be in a position to receive potable water by the end of this calendar year, early next winter for sure, which is a really big milestone on that. We really wanted to be there for this, they call pre-commissioning of the water treatment plant, but given the COVID issues and requirements, that's not possible for us. But I think it's a really positive outcome, of this project for all of the parties. The other pipeline, the San Juan Lateral, is the part that would take water from the main stem of the San Juan River, deliver it down from Shiprock to Gallup and ultimately to Window Rock. That's several years away, and that's where I think a lot of the additional costs that the state engineer described are coming from. And ISC staff and state engineer have been involved in value planning with the Navajo Nation, Hickory Apache Nation, Bureau of Reclamation, and City of Gallup, trying to look at are there ways to potentially reduce costs but maintain the main purposes of that pipeline, and that process is ongoing. And John, that was all I had on that piece.
No, that's good. I'm glad you inserted that. Let's move on to the Yamet settlement, which is the includes the pueblos of Nambe, Tesuque, Pojoaque, and San Ildefonso. Again, water rights in that particular settlement, the Pueblo water rights were adjudicated with senior priorities. The settlement agreement provides protections for non-Pueblo junior water rights in exchange for a regional water system that's going to be constructed by the United States to serve the Pueblos and non-Pueblo residents in that Pojoaque Valley. There was also the United States acquired 2,381 acre feet of water rights to be delivered to the Pueblos. About 1,000, a little bit less than half of that were San Juan Chama project rights, which really reduced the effect of the Pueblo's senior water rights on existing water supplies in the basin by being able to use some of the San Juan Chama water rights. Construction of the system is being funded by the United States, the state, Santa Fe County, and the Pueblos. The Pojoaque Basin Regional Water Authority will operate the system, and the portion of the system will serve non-Pueblo residents in the basin will be paid for by the state and by the county. I'm not going to go over all the history on it, but just a recent history. Back in September of 2017, the State Engineer's Office promulgated administrative rules for the Nambe Pojoaque Tesuque Water Master District. Active water resource management is part of that effort. And on October the 3rd of 2017, they issued the state engineer issued a metering order for metering of all wells in that basin and that water master district. The deadline for installation and subsequently was extended to October 2019. There was a delay in getting all the meters in, and there's still some meters that need to be put in place, but we're hoping that those meters continue to get put in place, and we have metering reports from everybody. In September 11, so about a year ago, the Secretary issued a record of decision for the final environmental impact statement for the regional water system. Project costs, the portion of the system that will serve the Pueblos will be paid for entirely by the United States. When we looked at, there was what we call a 611G agreement, and the agreement was executed again about a year ago. Our governor signed it also. It adopts a consensus design concept for the regional water system. And it allows for, again, additional funding from all the entities. The United States has agreed to contribute an additional $137 million in 2018 dollars, contingent upon Congress amending the Settlement Act, which is, I think we're still waiting on, but Governor Lujan Grisham signed legislation appropriating $20 million to the Indian Water Rights Settlement Fund, $2 million in addition to the $18 million for the state's scheduled cost share contribution, with a specific provision that this $20 million appropriated in 2019 constitutes about 20% of the state's contribution towards the Amet settlement to pay both the state's current cost share obligation and additional amounts necessary for the state's share of non-federal cost returns. State's current obligation in the cost share agreement is about $104.5 million. And I think I wanted to, well, let me just continue on this, and I have I think they're on this sheet. Under the 611G agreement, the combined funding for the project is to be provided for as follows: about $276.8 million by the United States, $104.5 million, as I mentioned, by the state, and $38.4 million by Santa Fe County. The non-federal funding is to pay for non-Pueblo portion of the proposed regional water system. So the federal contribution over the last 8 years, Congress has appropriated to and provided direct funding for the Amet settlement totaling about $131.5 million. Additionally, the president's budget recommends another $4 million. And of course, we talked about the additional funding of $131 million that is hopefully forthcoming. Let me move to the, Rolf, did you want to add anything on the Amet?
Yes, John, just briefly, that this is with regards to our capital requests where funding would go into the Water Rights Settlement Fund. We're doing that $9 million a year, and that's all related to Amet. We signed the revised cost share agreement here just about a month ago, and we'll be transferring around $21 million from that fund to the federal government in the next week. And then we have an $11 million obligation next October, which with the balance that's in the fund and the additional $9 million would be sufficient to meet that requirement. And construction has started. I think that's one of the main things I wanted to bring up relative to this settlement and the project. COVID slowed it down a little bit, but they're on the ground working just north of the highway bridge there to Los Alamos at Odalie Bridge. So, John, that's it.
Thanks, Rolf. And yeah, if you get a chance to go out there, that's a very interesting construction. It's right on San Ildefonso Pueblo. It's a rainy collector system. It's a unique design and construction methodology to really reduce the footprint of the construction so that it really disturbs as little Pueblo land as possible. But it's ongoing, and that's, as Rolf said, it's a good thing is the construction has started, and we're excited about that. Let's go to the Taos Pueblo settlement. That agreement we had a signing ceremony in 2006, way back when, and that agreement resolved the claims of Taos Pueblo to the use of waters in the Rio Pueblo de Taos, Rio Hondo systems, which are both tributaries to the Rio Grande. I'm going to bypass a lot of the older history on this particular one, but the settlement projection costs, according to the terms of the Taos settlement agreement, the total cost of the settlement is $144 million. Of that amount, about $88 million was federal funds. The state's contribution required the state to contribute $12 million of the non-Pueblo portion of the planning, design, and construction of the mutual benefits projects, 6.9 million for the acquisition of water rights by the non-Pueblo parties, and a little bit over $1 million for the operation, maintenance, and replacements for the mutual benefits projects. That total was a little bit over $20 million and was not subject to indexing for inflation. The state has completed its funding obligation under the Taos settlement. So both funding requirements essentially for Navajo and Taos have been completed. The AMLET one is the one that we're focused on now. And again, through our ICIP request, hope to get that money without any problems over the next several years so that we can close these three settlements out. Let me get the bottom, going back to the PowerPoint, the Indian water right negotiations. I wanted to talk a little bit about tying it into that first bullet item on the expansion request for our dedicated tribal unit. We have, we're ongoing, we have settlement negotiations with 9 Pueblos, tribes, and nations in 6 different adjudications. So we're extremely busy. We are challenged a little bit from a resource standpoint if we're really going to make a lot of progress, and we are working with a lot of federal negotiation teams in a lot of these settlements. We really need the personnel so that we can continue to move forward in these additional areas. I want to just move quickly forward through this so we can leave time for questions. We have some policy initiatives and programs. We have an expansion, as I mentioned, expansion request for the unit dedicated to negotiation and settle for implementation of the Indian water rights settlements. That's really one of our top priorities. And again, with the general fund in the situation we're in right now, it may be another year or so before we can actually get a lot of those resources that we really need. There's again a continued ongoing negotiations for the tribal settlements. Again, the adjudications and the involvement of all the tribal entities. We're going to continue to outreach to we have a tribal liaison, very active tribal liaison, Myron Armijo, former governor, lieutenant governor of Santa Ana. He really gets out into the field, and he's a little bit challenged now with COVID, but he's doing a lot of phone calls and making a lot of connections. But we continue to work with as many tribes, pueblos, and nations as we can. Still coordinating with the United States, our state and local agencies, a lot of collaboration with the Sakias, our congressional delegation, and other non-government organizations. And we're going to continue to move in that direction as best we can and as resources allow. And then consultation on water administration, including defining roles and responsibilities. We've had some recent very good discussions with Taos Pueblo. Once you get into the detail of the settlements, a lot of times it's really, you really have to get in and define roles and responsibilities on who's responsible for what. Water administration by a state agency that involves tribal water rights is pretty new to the state of New Mexico, new elsewhere at other places. So we're trying to make sure that those roles and responsibilities are defined. People are measuring and metering as they're supposed to, accordance with the settlement agreement, and reporting their water use. And it allows us to actually move forward in these areas. That was pretty quick. Well, Rolf, do you have anything to add on any of these?
Yeah, John, just one on that last piece there. I mean, an example of this consultation would be from this summer on the Rio Chama, where the natural flows of the Rio Chama, starting in June, were so low that there was almost no water for any of the water right holders on the Rio Chama downstream of really TA to divert and utilize water. The state engineer's office, with support from the ISC and multiple parties on the Rio Chama, including Okewinge Pueblo, work to share water through that really, really difficult time. And they're doing that today. But at one point in time, and I'm not sure, state engineer may know better than me, you know, the OK Wingate, which has the most senior right on that system, actually had no water available for their diversions. And the other diversions in there that start at priority dates of 1600 and go, I think, up to the late 1800s, generally had no water without the shortage sharing that went on. And I think that's a really positive example, but it takes a huge amount of effort and coordination amongst a large number of people. And we're able to focus in that area and maybe a few others. And I think it's a great example of how this works and how it's positive.
That's a great point. The short sharing piece, and as Rolf mentioned, I think with OK Wingate and the three senior ditches, the Acequia ditches, both being able to take water 3 days a week in succession, and then the other that are more senior water rights than almost anywhere in the West, but still being subject to restrictions. And I think just to say a little bit about the drought that we're in, we're really concerned about our reservoirs. We have probably over 70% of the state that's in what we call a severe drought status already. We've got an El Nino year coming up, which is, a La Nina year, a La Nina year setting up, which means the storm track is moving north of New Mexico, or is likely to move north of New Mexico. Our reservoir levels on average, they're about 20% of average. So the storage in our reservoirs is really, really low. And we're really looking for another really challenging year. We had to do active management, shortage sharing, and going into almost every basin within New Mexico this year, and conditions are setting up to be even worse for next year. And so it's really important to be able to have these initiatives and agreements in place so that we can get into some of these areas and still allow for reasonable use of water and and it's really incumbent upon the water users in the respective basins for them to agree to some of these shorter sharing requirements. And we as the state engineer's office sort of help administer it and sort of police it, but it's really an agreement amongst the existing users that's done on a voluntary basis. Let me move down to accomplishments. And again, we really already covered the first one. The Pewaukee Basin Regional Water System is starting construction, limited construction right now. And we're again, it's always nice to see these agreements. We look back in the mid 2000s when they were actually signed, but to actually put them in place and implement them and get all the funding that's required to phase these construction projects in takes a lot of time, a lot of diligence, and a lot of effort, and quite frankly, a lot of our staff time to make sure that these settlements get implemented and followed through. And so our job's not done once we have a negotiated settlement, but to continue to stay involved and keep things going. We really talked about the first couple. I'm personally I've been involved in facilitating some of the implementation of the Water Rights Administration in the Taos settlement, meeting with the Taos Pueblo, and then those outside the Acequias that are Taos Valley Acequia Association. We've had some meetings just recently to try to define roles and responsibilities, talk about exactly what some of the adjudication means and the orders that are out there, answering questions, trying to be as transparent as we can as we move forward and actually start implementing these water rights. The third bullet, continued participation. I've mentioned this, but we've got, you can see nine pueblos there, 5 Indian water rights settlements all over the state of New Mexico, and they require a lot of care and feeding, essentially, as we move forward with federal negotiation teams to get these negotiated settlements into place so that we can quantify and define water rights for the rest of the pueblos and nations that we have in New Mexico. The Gallup water supply project, we mentioned that. There's essentially two projects, the San Juan lateral and the Cutter lateral. Those are those are essential to get in place. The water needs for the nation out there, just with respect to this the COVID pandemic that we have. We recognized, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that we needed running water in the Navajo communities. And the way to get that done was through Indian water rights settlements. And now it's the construction of that pipeline that's going to eventually get the water to those entities, and would greatly help the Navajo Nation with something like this pandemic that happens, where running water is essential for sanitary purposes. I can't urge enough how important these projects are to get them in place. And then there's coordination with there's a 10 tribes partnership on the Colorado River issues. Rolf can say more on this, but it's really important. We have shortages on the Colorado system. New Mexico is essentially an upper basin state on the Colorado River system. The drought is pervasive throughout the West, and it's extending down in the Colorado system. We're really concerned about shortages on that system that essentially could affect our San Juan water Chama supply, which would affect shortages to the system, the San Juan Chama deliveries to the Middle Rio Grande, which so many of our pueblos are really dependent upon, as well as everybody in the Middle Valley, with respect to the total water supply that's within the Rio Grande, Rio Chama, and those particular areas. So very concerned about that. Rolf, did you want to say anything on the Colorado River stuff, since you're closer to it?
Yeah, John, I'll say something maybe about the next these two items on here, if you don't mind. So with regards to the 10 Tribes Partnership, I think many of the committee members are aware that these tribal nations on the Colorado River have rights to very significant portions of the surface water in those streams, but a lot of that water, particularly in other states, but some also in New Mexico, has not been put to beneficial use. And so the pressure that is on the system relative to the tribes and others is very significant. And an engagement with the individual tribes and that partnership, I think, is critical to how we move forward really after 2026, when the current guidelines for operation of the big reservoirs on the system comes to an end and something new needs to go in place. And so we're engaging with the partnership and very much appreciate their outreach to us to do so in that regard. And then more specifically on the San Juan River system, really engaging with the Navajo Nation on the use of their settled water rights in that system, as well as the Hickory Apache Nation. Yeah, I'm not sure if all of you are aware that with the closing of the San Juan generating station, or the reduction currently in its operations, indirect impact of that was on the Hickory Apache Nation and the loss of a contract for delivery of settlement water for that tribe to that generating station. And the Hickoryas, and I think not so much with the Navajo Nation right now, but with the Hickoryas, the question really is, how do they get long-term benefits out of that settlement, and can they work with New Mexico to seek to do that? And we are trying to and working with them now to seek to do that. The next bullet on here, the coordination with the both of the nations, as well as other non-Indian water users on the San Juan River and 2 Indian nations in southern Colorado. We're coordinating on what's called the San Juan Recovery Implementation Program. And this is an endangered species program that seeks to recover 2 endangered fish in the San Juan River. All the parties, the state and the nations, are there at the table equally with this. And this program provides endangered species compliance for all of the water users, including the nations. So it's pretty important The state has met its initial cost share contribution to that program, but it ends on its own terms in 2023. And the fish are doing better, but haven't been recovered. So more work will be needed, and we are coordinating very frequently with both of these nations on those issues. And John, that's all I have to report on those two pieces.
Okay, the last two bullet items on here, another example of a shortage sharing agreement that has worked really successfully for the last 20 years. And the Pueblo Jemez, ZIA, there's a coalition of acequias on the Rio Jemez that when we get into situations where the flow level in the Jemez River is at a certain point, we look at these different schedules that have been set up and agreed upon by the acequias and the tribes in that area, the Pueblos. What's happened, this past year, another Schedule A was implemented. I think that's the one that's been implemented in probably 6 or 7 different years over the last 20 years. And it allows for the Pueblos to take water 6 days of the week, the acequias 1 day a week. And it's worked out well. And it's been done through collaborative efforts between the state engineer's office, the two Pueblos, and the acequias. And so again, another example of how that works. And we had another active shortage sharing season down there. And then during the pandemic, we and our staff have worked with Indian Affairs, New Mexico First, others to get potable water to several communities. I think a lot of the state agencies have tried to pull together. We've had meetings and other things, other directives that we've tried to help in order to provide supplies and give some input to help the Pueblos, tribes, and nations throughout the state. So I think with that, Madam Chair, we'll end our presentation and stand for questions.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for joining us today on this and great presentation. I have Senator Rodriguez. And then after that, Senator Gonzalez. Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, John and Ross, for your presentations and certainly all your hard work, especially because many times you're not funded in your budgets adequately, the way you should be for the workload that you have. You have some very tough issues. But I want to thank you for your work on the water settlements and the continued work that many times we think that once these settlements are signed, it's done and over with. And I'm happy you reminded us that's not the way it is. That sometimes feels like it's just the beginning instead of the end. Now you're having to facilitate the agreement and all the provisions consistent with water settlements and so on. That's huge in itself. But let me just maybe create a tiny bit of history here on this issue, and that is that this Indian water rights settlement is actually a 60-year in the making agreement, at least. And to have that finalized, settled, and finally someday, hopefully very soon, adequately funded is a big day. And so I just want to say thank you. I know that's an understatement because you worked so hard to do that. But let me just say the state had committed approximately $9 million per year into this Indian water rights settlement. And during the tough times when we couldn't meet those amounts with our budget, it slipped, and the department here, the state engineers department, did not get the $9 million to be able to proceed with the projects as quickly as was intended. And so what we did is last year, we made it up by coming up with the 18 million. That's what John is talking about. We doubled that to $18 million plus the additional $2 million to make it 20 million. So that kind of helped us catch up on this deficit that we had. Doesn't mean that that's enough, as has been stated here. The intent here is that we continue to fund it until, I'm not sure that I can say until a few years from now and so on. I really believe that this is something that's going to need continued funding because the state engineer's office is having to adhere to so many other provisions of not only the settlements, but new things that come up with respect to water needs for tribal and Indian nations. And so this state has to be committed to continuing to fund our water issues. Now, that being said, I'm happy that with the Abeyta water settlement, we finally pitched in the final for the settlement itself, not to continue to administer the provisions, as we said, but at least for the settlement itself, we came up with $12 million. I think it was at once. That was the final cost for the settlement, and we kept putting in little bits at a time, and we just weren't catching up. So finally, we came up and said, okay, this was just about 2-3 years ago. We put in the $12 million and finalized that. So thank you for bringing that up, John. And that being said, I just have a quick question, Madam Chairman, because I know we have to move on. But that is, John, did you tell me that, or tell us, the committee, that you brought up $278 million from the federal government, and then you said $104 million from the state and 38.4 from Santa Fe County. Those were the contributions, that the commitment for the contributions, or tell me what that refers to, because my WebEx went a little bit blank for a moment there. Thank you, John. Whoops, and your voice is not coming in. Let's see. Seems like you're on mute.
Yes, he's muted. There you go.
There we go. Now let's see.
There he is.
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Yeah.
So, Madam Chair and Senator Rodriguez, first of all, Senator Rodriguez, thank you for your support for all these years. I think that support's been critical. Entering into these settlements was a big financial obligation for the state of New Mexico, and I know you worked tirelessly to get that funding in place for all of us, really, so that we could make these successful. The numbers that you mentioned are the requirements. We still have, as far as the state goes, we have about 47.5 million left, as is our portion of that 104.5. So we put in about we have about $57 million that's in it. The other ones are commitments. All that money is not in place just yet. And so as we move forward, hopefully we'll get the federal portion, which has been committed at 130. I think it's 137. I think when you add the indexing to it, it's more like 157 million. But that's what the federal government has left to pay, and the county still some of their payments have been deferred, and we can probably get you those amounts if we need to, the exact amounts. But I think the ones in the report are accurate with respect to those balances. The 38.4 million by Santa Fe County, those are commitments. The 104.5 for the state, that's a commitment. As I said, we still have 47 million left on that. And then the federal government still has a portion of that 276.8 million to provide. Well, do you know any better on those numbers?
Yeah, I can just add a little bit here briefly that I won't go over all the numbers, but if you add up that 276.8, 104.5, and 38.4, you get a greater number than the 406 for construction approximately. And that's because the settlement has construction in it, it has service connections, and it has some mitigation. And so sometimes those numbers kind of go into different places. And so we have that bigger piece that's there, as John mentioned. We have a remaining contribution of over about 47 million. And so we anticipate $9 million requests continuing through 2028 in order to meet those requirements. And my understanding is the federal government has appropriated about 128 million to date towards this settlement. And so I don't have those numbers right in front of me, but approximately 150 million more is needed from the federal government. And that's actually probably the outstanding piece that's with us in front of us now, is to get authorization for that piece. I hope that helps answer that question.
Yes, it does, Ralph. Thank you very much. And I think that I'm going to stop here, Madam Chairman. This is one of those topics we can go on talking about it because it lasted so long to get settled. And so there's lots of history in this, but I want to thank the staff for doing such a great job. Thank you, Madam Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, excellent Senator. And I have Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to our presenters. Thank you very much for the information provided to us. Part of it, has been addressed by Senator Rodriguez, but one part that always has stayed in my mind, when it comes to the facilitate and the implementation, will that always be under the office of the state engineer? Or eventually do you see that it should eventually go to the local levels for the entities to do their own?
So, Madam Chair and Representative Senator Gonzalez, I'm sorry, your senator. Last time we did these, you weren't, but yeah, the settlement agreements themselves specifically stated what the involvement of the state was going to be, and in your case, and you're probably interested in probably both the Amet and the Taos one from your area, but they stipulated that the state engineer was going to be the water master, certainly in the Amet settlement, and so it came out of the agreement when the settlement agreement was signed that was the state's involvement as the water master. The state engineer's office promulgated rules, district specific regulations in 2017, and so so that's been set. In the Taos settlement, we're actually meeting, and we've had a few meetings as we move forward, and I think we're talking about administration and how we're going to move forward in that particular area. I think the Taos Valley Acequia Association probably has some ideas. I think in our conversations with them, we're going to include them in our administrative efforts. But in order for us to actually, I think, set the stage for this thing, we'd probably want to draft similar regulations so that the state engineer, entities tend to like the state engineer involved in it, because if there's an enforcement piece, then the state gets called upon to be the bad guys, essentially, which is, it doesn't put us in a great position, but many times we have to get involved so that we can make sure that the agreements are followed through, and we're still having some challenges on meter reporting from both from tribal and non-tribal entities, and so we have to go in and stay involved to a certain extent. I would be happy to actually hand off some of the responsibilities to others, but it also comes with financial issues and other aspects of water administration. So, I don't think the state engineer's office has to be involved necessarily, but those are usually determined during the settlement negotiations.
Chair and John, I guess what I'm looking at is, we don't know where we'll be in 10 years from now, in my part and your part, but, whoever is in place, and how important it is to have that integrity of, what has been done for so many, many years, and having that safeguard, to keep that. And, that's one part that I see. The other part, Madam Chair, that I just want to mention is that I'm very encouraged for the number of years that I have been involved, and also very familiar with, say, for example, the Taos Valley Acequias. But I have seen more involvement the last few years, and I have seen more young people getting involved than I had ever seen in the past. And to me, that is it's a plus, and very healthy to the system and to, what will be seen in the future. So, with that, thank you for the work you've done, and thank you for the presentations to both of you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank Thank you, Senator.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from anyone in the chamber? No? Anybody else online? No? Thank you for your presentation. And I don't want to add more to your plate in that sense, but we did have that report about the uranium. Do you, and I mean, it's tied to water, but do you have any comments about how we could establish something without adding too much into your department, but to establish some kind of entity to move this forward about the uranium cleanup, especially knowing that water is an issue, that some places were contaminated, their water areas. So any ideas or thoughts?
No, Madam Chair, I have not seen that report. The water quality piece is really handled by the New Mexico Environment Department, and they have different bureaus within the Environment Department that handles that. Certainly, if there's a water quantity piece that gets pulled in, we would more than likely, comment or come in, and we can come in at the request of the Environment Department. But it's really it's in their purview and under their laws and rules and regulations involving contaminated water.
Because you did mention something about regulatory stuff, and that's what came across my mind, was about, stating something in that manner so we don't end up having to have these settlements and stuff. Or what were you meaning by as far as regulatory?
Well, regulatory is the New Mexico Environment Department, Madam Chair. They're the ones that enforce the water quality standard through the Water Quality Control Commission. So the state engineer has a seat on the Water Quality Control Commission. So we sort of indirectly get involved in some of the water quality issues made through that particular commission. But the state engineer's office, we don't get involved necessarily until we get a request. If there is a request from New Mexico Environment Department, an example would be like a Superfund site. If there is some groundwater that's been contaminated, we'll coordinate with the Environment Department so that we won't issue and condition, say, a domestic well permit, so we don't allow any new water permits to be drilled into those areas that are already contaminated. But for the most part, this is an Environment Department issue.
Yes, and I say that because I know there's going to be a big influx, and we're already seeing it as far as, having the Navajo, in my particular district, providing water to the constituents of the area, that there's going to be, drilling and different ways and places that they're going to try to access water to provide to the people. And I'm afraid that we don't, to make sure that we oversee it in a manner that we don't end up making people sick by giving them access to a contaminated area. So I think that's one of, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I think we will coordinate with the Environment Department if that is the case there. And there are new permits that are filed with our Aztec office. We would coordinate with the Environment Department to make sure that we're cognizant of those areas that have pollution plumes in place that would affect health and safety of individuals.
Because when we talk about the drought too, I believe is going to be a tighter strain on the system, and we're going to see a lot more advocation as far as the Acequias and all the tribes and nations, and even from our locals, farmers and agriculture, that we're going to practically almost be fighting over water if this drought continues. And how will we alleviate or make sure that we're being fair, that we're being equal throughout the state to assure communities that really rely on agricultural development, that they still can continue to, make progress or feed their families in that case. But I appreciate your work, and I don't know if you want to comment on that. Well, actually, one more thing. I still did see not much movement as far as the Tahajale They did try to have some kind of rally event just recently, I think it was Monday. So do you have any update on that? Or I know they were talking about moving the line through a certain area, but I understand there was right-of-way issues.
No, Madam Chair, there still are right-of-way issues with the pipeline project. I know that, the good sign is that the Albuquerque Water Utility Authority has submitted an application to the Water Trust Board for almost $4 million to help pay for a water system. And so that's going to go through the next funding cycle. This decision by the Water Trust Board hasn't been made on that particular project yet, but a lot of the holdup has been in getting the alignment and the rights of way associated with a pipeline network work. There was the last I heard that there was still some people some landowners that weren't cooperating, and that they might have to go to eminent domain to condemn the land in order to get a right of way for that pipeline. But I don't know the details of any recent information that might have happened. I know people are continuing to work on it.
And I just wondering, because I was like, is that the only solution, is that we run a pipe, or was there any access to? But thank you, I know it's an ongoing issue. Thank you for your presentation. And last call for any questions and I'm sure we'll be touching base off and on with this. And thank you. Thank you, John, Antonio, and Mr. Schmidt-Peterson for all the work you do, and water is life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Members of the committee, appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we are, is Amber Dodson on? Are we ready to go? Okay.
Hi, yes.
Oh, great. I'm glad you can join us. So we're going to have a report on the Senator John Pinto Native Filmmakers Memorial Fund next. You can introduce yourself and go ahead.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Hello, committee members. We're very pleased to be here today to provide an overview of the Senator John Pinto Memorial Fund and some of the developments and results of the fund. We've got a presentation we'll get into in just a moment. My name is Amber Dodson. I'm the director of the New Mexico Film Office. And with me here today, I have our New Mexico Film Office Senior Manager of Operations and Workforce Development Programs, Rochelle Bussey. I want to, right off the bat, just say that Rochelle is the keystone to this program being facilitated and administered through our office. Without her, we could not have done it. So thank you, Rochelle. And we will dive in to the presentation. First, we'd like to start with just a general overview. The Senator John Pinto Memorial Fund was established in 2019. It was a $100,000 grant fund with the intention to support Native New Mexican filmmakers and students. That grant would then be divided into separate $5,000 grants, again, awarded to Native students and filmmakers living and working in New Mexico. The applicants must be a registered member of one of the tribes or pueblos of New Mexico, and funding the $5,000 grants can be used for any phase of production. That's including pre-production, production, and post-production. We got quite a resounding response in 2020. We had 36 applicants for this grant, and we awarded 20 grantees $5,000 grants just this summer. And our office, the New Mexico Film Office, had the honor of administering this program, and we are so proud of it. I want to give a shout out to Senator John Pinto. The late Senator John Pinto, thank you, and his granddaughter, Senator Shannon Pinto. Without their vision, of course, this would not be possible. And we will dive into the qualification process. This is how the filmmakers, what they had to submit, and how the review committee decided who would be awarded the grants. Essentially, applications opened in January and closed in June. So we gave that there was a large window of time to really spread the word about this program and get as many applicants as possible statewide. We received 36, as I mentioned prior. What was required in their submission materials included a bio or CV or resume for each project member on the production, current or previous work samples, project information such as the content, the objectives, the log line, which is a one-line description of the project, a treatment, which is more of a longer summary of the production, the artistic statement or vision, and the plan for distribution. How are you going to get this in front of people, on what platforms, et cetera. Further, we asked for a line item total budget of the project and a specific budget for how these funds will be used. We also required a list of funding and grants received to date and 2 letters of support. And here on the right, you see a picture of Ramona Emerson, who was also absolutely critical to this program being so successful. And she was not only on the review committee, but as you'll see at the end of this presentation, produced and edited a video about the filmmakers and their projects that we are so grateful for. So thank you to Ramona Emerson. The 2020 grant recipients, what an incredible group of people. Rochelle and I both had the pleasure of being on many virtual meetings with these filmmakers and hearing how these grants affected their projects and their goals. And it was really a game changer for most of these people. We feel a special bond to all of them now. We hope to meet them in person one day. There were 20 recipients, again, who each received $5,000. They must complete their projects by 2022. And what we asked for is an end credit with the NM New Mexico Film Office logo and the Senator John Pinto Memorial Fund acknowledgement. Also, we've asked for the completed projects to be screened in New Mexico. So that's just another fantastic opportunity to get these productions and these finished projects out in front of more people and in front of more audiences. We can go to press and video. We had not only a really resounding, positive and resounding response from the Native community around this program, but also the greater community at large. This picked up quite a bit of press. Here's just a few snippets. And before we go into the video, which will really give you a taster of these incredibly talented filmmakers and their projects, again, we just want to thank the late Senator John Pinto, Senator Shannon Pinto, Ramona Emerson, and of course, Rochelle. And thank you for the support for this program. It really has been, we've had some calls with filmmakers and there have been tears of joy and statements that this has been a life-changing event. So we're very proud to have been a part of this and help administer it. We can watch the video and then we can open it up for questions. Thank you so very much, Madam Chair and committee members.
As Navajo people, our people believe that we are nature. Every part of our body, our skin, our flesh is made from Mother Earth. That's why we call Earth our mother.
With this grant, we've been able to complete primary interviews and gain the momentum and support to continue our production further. Thank you so much for funding my project and others.
We learned and planted as much as we could in our little alley in Flagstaff. Even our 4 chickens were ready for a change. Flagstaff became increasingly violent, and the number of COVID cases in America is beginning to surge. So we said goodbye to our mountain, and in 2 days, with a U-Haul and a dolly, we packed our plants, chickens, seeds, and dogs, and headed straight to my childhood village in Pueblo. My wife and I are bringing life back to an area of endless possibilities.
My name is Natalie Benali, and I am one of the recipients of the Senator John Pinto Filmmakers Grant. And I just want to say that with this grant, I've been able to not only finally pursue my filmmaking passions, but it's allowing me to bring a story to people about trauma and learning how to let that go and move forward, which I think even if you're not Native, anyone who has suffered a traumatic time in their life can relate to that. And so I'm excited to shoot my short film entitled Mother's Day. Of course, we are doing all we can to make sure it's safe to do so before we embark on that journey. And I just think it's important that this grant continues because it allows people like me the opportunity to start our filmmaking dreams. And so I think it's a very necessary thing to keep going forward.
Thanks to the Senator Pinto grant, we were able to make our film, which we're doing right now.
Hi, my name is Shireen Gonzalez, and I'm from San Ildefonso, Pueblo, and I'm a recipient of the Senator Pinto grant for my project titled Riverbank. As a Native filmmaker, I'm very much aware that we are underrepresented in the media, which is why it's so important for the Senator Pinto grant to exist and why I am so grateful to be a recipient. Because the Senator Pinto grant helps ensure that our tribal communities are represented here in New Mexico and that our New Mexico Native filmmakers can make their projects come to life and that they are financially able to do so.
Dante, hello, this is Stanley Bain coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I wanted to provide a quick update on my short film Together. We submitted an application to secure funding to complete post-production on the film. And I'm happy to say that next week I'm meeting the sound engineers at Here Kitty Studios here in Albuquerque. Getting a professional sound mix done on the film was something that would not have been possible without the funding. We were able to also secure a person to compose a score and collaborating it among other things. So for the much gratitude from me and my team.
Sculpting is an obsession to me. I have to do it. It lives inside me and it has to come out. That magical moment when I get an idea, it's frightening because I'm afraid to start. But once I start, it's like magic.
Hi there, my name is Jenna Winters. I am the director of Dream, Touch, Believe, which is a film about my father, sculptor Michael Naranjo. I know that this project is important because our world needs inspirational stories now more than ever. And because of that, I also believe and know that now more than ever, our world needs more grants, just like the Senator John Pinto Memorial Filmmaker Fund. I am a proud recipient of this grant for so many reasons, but I know I don't have all day.
So I'll tell you what I can in a few seconds. This grant not only gives me the ability to continue shooting my project, but it gives me the courage and the knowledge, knowing that my state is behind me and believes in this project and recognizes this project. That in and of itself is priceless.
This is Forrest Goodluck, one of the recipients of the John Pinto grant, and I wanted to say that the grant has been so helpful in not only allowing the ideas of my film Just Kids to become a solid idea in my brain, but it's also, allowed me to make it a reality. And as of now, the script is done. We're in pre-production. We're planning out finding additional funding for the feature. And as of now, we're just planning on shooting during COVID, which is easier said than done. But I just want to thank John Pinto. I want to thank everybody who helped out with delivering his grant and everybody in New Mexico Film. So
my name is Kevin Brown, and I'm one of the recipients of the Senator John Pinto Memorial Fund for Native Filmmakers. I'm recording this message from the conference room of the Indigenous Nation Library Program on the campus of University of New Mexico. This program was funded in 2004, and Senator John Pinto was one of those legislators who funded this program. So I recognize how funding for programs like this and the Native Filmmakers Fund is deeply important for Native American students at UNM, but also Native American filmmakers in the state of New Mexico. I'm also appreciative, and I want to send my thank you to the late Senator John Pinto, Shannon Pinto, the New Mexico Film Office and the Selection Committee for awarding me this award. This fund has completed the project that we were working on, and the film is called Marlin. And the production team, myself, the director, the cast and crew are deeply appreciative of this award.
Hi everyone, Josh Zuni here from the Zuni Tribe, Keshe. I'm the writer and director of the short film Rude Girl, where a half Native American and white teenager becomes our first superhero here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Without the family of the Senator John Pinto Filmmaker Grant, this would never have happened. It was the spark that really needed to happen to start the production of this film and my career. I owe a lot, much love. Also, thank you to the New Mexico Film Office. Without you guys, this would never have happened. Really appreciate all the help and the love from the great state of New Mexico. Without you guys, I probably would have still been assisting a lot of directors, producers, and actors. But with this great opportunity and being prepared to have the script in place and have a budget and have a schedule, it really came into the light that this story needs to happen. It really revitalizes a lot of Native languages. It helps crew up a lot of Native Americans around here locally to help support the film community. And also it really brings to light the Zuni culture and language and really revitalizes a role for our first woman here locally to become a superhero and potentially a superstar in Hollywood. So without you guys and your help and your support, this would never have happened.
Wondering where you have gone to, not knowing how we lost you. I pray God is watching over you.
Senator J. Pinto grant has greatly helped me to purchase a few filmmaking tools that I otherwise would not have been able to purchase. And it's also allowing me to go where I need to, by allowing me travel expenses to go fill some of these powerful, impactful women that are behind the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls movement, especially in New Mexico. So I'm very grateful to the Senator J. Pinto grant. And I'm proud to be the recipient, and he was quite an amazing individual, and I'm glad that his legacy will live on.
Hello, my name is Melissa Henry. The Senator Pinto Grant helped me create free educational movies for New Mexico's children.
Chairman, Emeritus Senate Education Committee. I ask you not to consent to turn over have been known to introduce my testimony.
Okay, thank you. We apologize for some of the glitching in that video, but I'm sure you got a sense of the filmmakers and the projects. And just one more thing, I'd like to echo the filmmaker Jenna Winters, that these stories, we also think it is absolutely the time to get these unique perspectives and diverse perspectives, these essential stories out there on the screen. So also one other thing, the panel of judges, the review committee, were 4 extraordinary, peerless filmmakers, Native filmmakers, who also volunteered their time to make the tough decisions and cutting down to just 20 awardees, but also volunteered time afterwards for each awardee to provide guidance and pointers to kind of launch their projects. So we're incredibly grateful to our review committee as well. We will open it up for questions, and thank you again so much, Madam Chair and committee members.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Do we have any questions from members in the chamber? No. Anybody online? Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just give me 1 second, having a little trouble here. There. No? Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Yes.
you. We can see you.
Yes, we can, Senator.
Very well. What can I say? Just very beautifully done, and touching so many persons that can just keep that remembrance of Senator Pinto. And I was very fortunate that to know him for many, many years, through education when he was teaching, and plus we both stayed at La Fonda Hotel for many years. So I just think it's a blessing that, this was established, and to see the comments and what has been said, and, what it has allowed these individuals to do is, it's breathtaking. And again, thank you to everyone who has been involved with this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm just grateful to have an opportunity to commemorate and pay tribute to a wonderful human being, a great leader, a great senator, and as you know, a great grandfather to you and father to a wonderful family. I was fortunate enough to have shared office with the Senator Pinto for 25 years. Actually going 24 approximately when he left heaven. And what keeps me going is that I remember that he's really not dead, that our great senator, a friend, our colleague, went on to live forever. He moved to a different address where he can now live forever. His life is infinite. And when I think of him that way, I can go on comforted by his warmth, his love, and his spirit. And although my office seems very bare, very sad at times, I have to remember what I just said, because that helps me move on and just remember with a grateful heart how fortunate I was to have the opportunity that I did to share those years with him. So, Madam Chair, please join me in taking comfort with his life that we know is now forever. He doesn't have the limitations, the finite limitations that we do here on earth, is how I believe. And therefore, he will be with us always. Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you, Senator Pinto.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Rochelle, for putting this together. It is. I'm glad it actually came to culmination this year, and we saw a product from it right away, and the impact, and see that there is a need for it. And I think when COVID started, one of the things that did occur too within the film industry and a lot of the filmmakers, if New Mexico wants to continue to support this industry, is it does it increased costs with projects moving forward, because they have to adhere to some of the added criteria in order to film, especially in closed spaces, making sure that everything is safe and sanitary for the participants in these projects and the staff that are there. So I guess I'm just trying to make comments to the committee and other members that it does need to be expanded a little. I know we are going to be strapped for, during this budgetary time for some money, but the $5,000 at the time seemed like it did go a long way, but now I'm seeing some smaller projects going about $8,000 just because of COVID, that it seemed like an extra $3,000 ended up getting tacked on there to meet all the, to get projects moving and to have filming take place each day. So please keep that in mind, and I hope we can still keep supporting this. And I really don't have questions, but I know it's a lot of comments about the projects, and I think this is a very powerful medium. It is the future. I think we will see a lot of expression come through this and see a lot of communication come through this, especially through these times of COVID, that this is probably, I think the glitches that we had today were really with our technology, and also speak to our needing updates within our, local communities, that the speed of having this communication come across without any glitches is about the infrastructure being updated and meeting those criteria, so we can have a little more smoother viewing. I don't know if you have any comments, further comments, Amber or Rochelle. I know we couldn't get all the recipients here because of COVID, but hopefully our New Mexicans will bring the numbers back down and before the session, so we'll be able to meet them in person, and hopefully we'll also see some final products too at that time. I don't know if anybody wants, you want to comment on that, Amber, about the cost and stuff. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all the other amazing, beautiful comments. Just to note that we will be, as I mentioned in the presentation, the final productions will be screened in New Mexico, and so when those productions start coming to the table and are complete, we, the New Mexico Film Office, will certainly be reaching out via our marketing outlets, our social media outlets, to help promote those viewings and screenings and get as many people in front of that screen as possible. And also just to touch on the COVID safe practices, you're right, Madam Chair, it has added more expense and more time to productions. And I think one of the good things about this program is they do have a lot of time to actually work very strategically around COVID. They don't need to deliver anything until 2022. So that's worked out beautifully, but it does indeed add more expense. So we thank you for the support and hopefully moving forward, this will continue to grow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I don't know if it would be too much. I know sending video over internet or even through email can take a lot, but how could I access what you showed us so that I could direct my family members to this, of how far we've gotten with this?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. We can, Rochelle and I will be in touch with your office and we can find a way to get it to you via Dropbox or something like that.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And it is an interesting time, and I appreciate all that you're doing and all of that. I think it really brings light to our New Mexicans, who we are and what we deal with, and also, the positive aspects of it too, of how New Mexico makes New Mexico very different from the rest of the U.S. So I appreciate that, and thank you. We'll continue to work together to make this keep happening. Any final comments or questions? And I believe we are a couple of minutes ahead on this. I think I probably go shed a few tears here, and we'll take a break here and come back in about, I guess we'll see if we can get our next presenters on. And we're just missing one, so we'll take a 5-10 minute. Yeah, we'll take a 5 to 10 minute break. We'll get back here at 2:55. Thank you. got everybody then, or? Okay.
See that?
Laura. Okay, we're still waiting for one more person to join us, and then we'll get moving. Or do we leave it up to them? Let me, I don't know if we have a couple, well, I just have one announcement right now. We can just do it now instead of at the end. About the November 6th, any legislation or endorsements by committee, if they can communicate that to Linnea before that meeting. And that'll be our final meeting too. So we have one more meeting and then that'll be our final committee meeting. And I don't know if anybody has any questions. And I think that's our only announcement right now. I don't think we have any public comment. There's no public comment right now. You can comment. I was gonna ask the water engineer, state engineer, to put all those numbers in the number of water bottles, so we know how much water we're getting. But I think that's a bit much to do. And I don't know if they calculated that in the water rights settlement, how much water's been donated to the communities in water bottles. Do they know what we're waiting for? Okay, so we have an update on community solar. Senator Liz Stefanik, Representative Roybal Caballero. I believe Pilar Thomas is the one we're waiting for. And Beth Boloff, Paul Biederman's on. I am Barudine. Is that the order we're going to be presenting in, Senator? You are up first on the agenda. I don't see. Let me see. Senator Stefanik. Oh, she's not there right now. Senator Stefanik. There she is. I can see you, but I cannot hear you. Senator Stefanik, I can see you, but I can't hear you. Still can't hear you. You're unmuted. Go to the drop down under the unmute and go to switch audio, disconnect, and then reconnect. And then reconnect. Okay. Okay. I hear you. Okay. Do you want to try again, Senator Stefanik? We see you, but okay, unmute. I see you're muted. Okay, go ahead, test your Senator. Go ahead, say something now. I see you're unmuted. Senator Stefanik, test your sound. Say hello to us. They still can't hear you. Did you go to the drop down, disconnect and reconnect?
Maybe she should try her computer, see if the computer's muted.
Might be in the settings. The manual mute button on your computer. Yeah, you see your lips moving, but we still don't hear. Okay, you're showing muted. Unmute. Well, I think we're not going to be up ahead on our time. So I don't know if you want to have her go all the way out. I don't know if you could go fully disconnect and reconnect, Senator Stefanik, because we cannot hear you at all. Roybal Caballero, you want to? I can't hear you either. Yeah, I can't hear you either. Is it something to do with the video they showed? Or yeah, I can hear Senator Sanchez. No, Roybal Caballero, I can't hear you. Liz, or you want to test yours? Well, let's see, who do we? I hear someone.
This is Paul Biederman. I just want to see if you can hear me.
Okay, we can hear you. So mic check, I guess we'll go down. We know
This is Senator Sanchez. Senator Stefanik might want to check her computers. This morning I was on another call and it was their own computer that was muted or low volume.
Yeah, I think she's gonna relog back in because I don't see her here. And I can call. So Mayanne, did you test your sound?
Hi, test, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And then Paul, we got yours. Beth?
And yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Beth, we can hear you.
Okay, you might suggest to Senator and Representative that they join by phone.
Yes, Stefanik, we can see you, but we still can't hear you. And Roybal Caballero, you want to test your mic? Yeah, I can see you, but I cannot hear you. What are you two up to? Yeah. Well, do we want to start with someone we can hear? I don't know, because we're not getting either one of the senator or representative. We cannot hear you. So.
If nothing else is working, this is Paul Biederman, Madam Chair. If nothing else is working, I think Ms. Beloff and I can probably cover the first few slides that they were going to cover.
And then we'll see if they can get.
Of course.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
Unless there's a phone they can use, maybe they could phone in.
Yes, Senator Stefanik's representative, I don't know if you want to call in instead of use your computer. We can't hear either one of you. Okay, the call-in number should be on the drop-down menu where the unmute is. Okay, Paul, you want to start, or Elizabeth?
Okay, Paul, would you like to cover the senatorial?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I think I'm open. My mic is working, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I unfortunately, forgive me if I stumble on this because I wasn't planning to present this part. And I hope the Senator and Representative will forgive me because this is the hard work involved, not mine. But this process is underway because of the enactment of Senate Memorial 63 in the last session. That created a process for a working group of stakeholders on community solar. Are we looking at slide 1, by the way? Realize you're not looking at what I am. Do we have slide 1 up for everybody?
Yes, it's showing.
Okay. The working group was created to talk about community solar legislation and the possibility for enacting it in this or a future session. The composition of the working group, as you can see from the slide, was very broad-based. It's all the stakeholders were at least invited to attend, who could be reasonably expected to have a stand in this, and who actually appeared during the debates and the committee hearings of the issue that was presented through House Memorial 9 and so, I'm sorry, through House Bill 9 and so on. It was a very inclusive process. It was open to all who wished to participate. The Legislative Council in the memorial was directed to arrange for a third-party facilitator to convene the working group to review statewide community solar initiatives and develop recommendations for the implementation of those initiatives. And that is a position that I have taken, and very gratefully. And the working group was directed to report its findings and recommendations to the appropriate interim legislative committees in the fall. Now, let me say that as facilitator, some of you know me as during the sessions, I'm employed by the during the session, I'm employed by Senator Wirth in the Senate Majority Analyst Pool. They have consented to my doing this, the senator and the staff, recognizing that, of course, I'm doing this not in their behalf. I'm not speaking on behalf of the senator or the Democratic senators at all. That's the job I only hold during the session. And I'm also not expressing any opinions, either my own or certainly those of the any legislators, as to whether the legislature should adopt community solar legislation, or if it did, how that legislation should look. I was hired to be a neutral facilitator, and that's what I've attempted to do. If we can go to the second slide, please, slide 2. Other than the two legislators who we still hope to hear from, but have not, the presenters for today will be myself, just basically only to explain the process. That's as much as I can do. But also we have Beth Beloff, who's the executive director of the Coalition of Sustainable Communities in New Mexico, who are very interested in this legislation. Mayani Barudin, who is the Interior West Manager and Tribal Liaison for the organization known as Vote Solar, and a member of Santo Domingo Pueblo. And Pilar Thomas is a partner in an LLP called Quarles and Brady. And Ms. Thomas is very active in working with initiatives on reservations and tribal communities. And she will introduce more of her credentials.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm still talking.
But yeah, well, let's see if
on.
Liz, let's check Liz, Senator
Sure.
Stefanik's sound, and Roybal Caballero. Go ahead.
Can you,
yes, we can.
Representative Roybal Caballero, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Representative Senator Stefanik. Can you test your?
Yes. Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Paul, did you want to continue or let Senator Stefanik?
Oh, they both, I think both Senator Stefanik and Representative Roybal Caballero had something to offer, and I'm glad that they have the opportunity now to do it. So I'll go mute.
Okay, go ahead, Senator Stefanik.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. At any time you cannot hear me, please say so, and Representative Roybal Caballero can pitch in. The agenda is on page 2 to go over the memorial, the group process, why we're so interested in community solar, and also about the Tribal Community Solar Task Force that's also been in place. Mayani will also talk about that. I'm on page 3 now, and the if you keep moving on, that's page 2. On to the next one. I'm actually speaking from your page 4.
Yes, we're on page 4.
Okay, so basically, Page 4 is actually page 3 on our new one. But anyway, Senate Memorial 63 created a process for everyone who was interested to get involved in talking about this. We had representatives from the state agency, Energy, Minerals, Natural Resources, the PRC, the State Land Office, utility companies, rural electric co-ops, the renewable energy industry representatives, environmental organizations, Native American nations, tribes, pueblos, low-income service providers, local governments, cities, counties, and interested community members. But I did say, first off, in that first few, is that the utility companies did and are participating. It's inclusive and open to everyone who wants to participate. The third-party facilitator has already been introduced. That's Paul Biederman. The Legislative Council approved moving ahead with the hiring of a facilitator just for this work group, not to lobby during the session. And he was confirmed as the third-party facilitator. I would like to turn it over to Paul to talk about our objectives, and but I would like for you to know that we had over 90 people start out with us in this work group, and now it's between 50 and 60 participants that we meet every 2 weeks. So Paul, now don't go to Paul. Representative Roybal Caballero, anything you want to add?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. And yes, I just want to say thank you for granting us this opportunity to give you an update. I'm actually extremely excited with this working group process because it is affording much more input. And each time we unfold community solar, the input is greater and more enhanced and more helpful. So I look forward to clarifying today any further misconceptions, clarifying points of common ground that have been afforded through the working group process, and then answer any questions and answers, as we all will today from my colleagues. And our ultimate goal and the reason why I'm so dedicated and enthusiastic about this is because we have had resounding support from our constituents, not only in my district, but around the state. And I think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity. And I encourage all my colleagues, all of our colleagues on today and through this process to please ask any and all questions. And we hope to have you join us in this dynamic new effort. Thank you. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator and Representative. And I just want to add that their participation has been so dedicated and so engaged in every aspect of this that it's been enormously helpful in terms of showing the participants that we've tried to encourage to participate just how seriously this is being taken. So they've provided an enormous boost for this. I also want to say that we have several other legislators who've been actively involved. In particular, Senator Pat Woods has sat in on many of our meetings, and as has Representative Abbas Akil and Representative Andrea Romero and others, including, by the way, a few candidates who are hoping to be in the legislature but aren't even working yet as legislators. So that's to their credit. If we could be in slide that I have numbered 6. Did we move to slide 6? Yes, that's it. Okay, so the process that we undertook, and I'm very glad, by the way, we got the comments of the senator and the representative before I got into this. The process that we undertook was based on the goal. The goal was to identify and report to the legislature on responses of these stakeholders that Senator Stefanik's summarized to community solar legislation. What aspects of a community solar bill might be acceptable for all these participants? What areas of disagreement exist among them? And could those remaining issues be narrowed or even resolved into consensus points? So we've taken a lot of effort, and this actually started before I even came on. We've taken a lot of effort to try to divine the positions and the attitudes of these numerous participants, all of whom were welcome. I mean, anybody else could have joined as well, and we did try to get the word out. So we started with a survey of the working group members to get a look at their starting positions and their concerns. If we can go to slide 7 for a moment. We scheduled a series of meetings of the full working group, all these 90 people, every 2 weeks, starting in mid-July. And so far, we've held 7 of those meetings. We decided that because in developing these meetings and designing them, we decided that because of the widely varying backgrounds and information that people brought to the table and the widely varying positions that people had, we needed to provide educational sessions for all the participants on the key aspects of community solar that had come up, of course, in the previous efforts to enact it through previous bills and other sessions. So these working group sessions, which began we started off with educational opportunities at the beginning of each of the full working group meetings. And those lasted about an hour, and they were focused on clarifying the issues for everyone, ensuring that we wouldn't be caught up in misunderstandings, and advising us on the experiences of other states with community solar projects. What's been tried elsewhere, what problems arose, how are those problems addressed, and were they successful? So we invited and received, we were very fortunate, everybody we asked participated, to receive excellent presentations from a representative of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Xcel Energy provided a talk on its experience with community solar in several other states. Vote Solar, the organization that Ms. Barutin represents, talked about their experience in Colorado. But I don't think I'm not sure if I mentioned accurately or adequately the survey that was conducted. That survey was conducted beforehand and was pretty detailed and provided a lot of information on how people were approaching the issue to begin with, what attitudes did they come in with. So what we were trying to do was explore those attitudes, those positions that people came in, to see just how firm were those, how flexible were they, and how much were they based in facts, and how much could they be adjusted if other facts arose. So each meeting, as I said, we had the speaker to begin with. After the presentations were made at each meeting, we divided into several smaller groups and devoted the second hour of each of these 7 meetings to conversations among participants on the various issues. The purpose was to clarify the positions again of the stakeholders, see if there were questions they had that could help understand the issues, and see where there was potential for consensus or, again, at least narrowing of disagreements. If we can go to slide 8, thank you. That's a list of the topics that we covered. And most of these have already been discussed by the working group. We've been taking notes on each of the breakout groups and compiling reports for each issue that has been discussed. And those reports will in turn be compiled into our final report to the legislature. Now, there were several issues that were so unique to certain parties and of such great importance to certain interests that to clarify their concerns and positions, we had to conduct separate meetings with representatives of those groups. That included meetings with Xcel, which already has a lot of experience with community solar in other states, PNM, which has not done that, but is obviously very interested because of the impact that they perceive that community solar may have, and it may be correct. We don't, we listened carefully to their concerns about that. Several meetings we had with co-ops, not only Numerica, which represents a number of the co-ops, but also with Kit Carson Electric, and representatives of tribes had an ongoing working group that you'll hear about a little later. So we are continuing to meet. We have at least one, if not two more meetings for the whole group. The next meeting of the full working group will address the work of the separate tribal Native American Nations working group that I just mentioned, and the implications for cooperatives and utilities that serve their electricity needs. We're also preparing to send out one more survey form to determine the positions of participants now that we've conducted educational sessions and group discussions, and to ensure that any stakeholder who missed the meetings or didn't feel ready to offer their opinions will have yet another chance to state their positions. Then we'll compile all these reports of breakout sessions and the surveys into one comprehensive report, which will summarize our findings as to the areas of agreement or potential agreement, areas of remaining concern, the factors presented in support of each party's position, and the choices that the legislature will need to make in drafting the bills, because we're not going to come out with the final bill from our group. That's of course for the legislators to decide. We are simply going to provide what we hope will be an informative and stimulating list of the options. So that's the part I was going to cover, and I can address questions later, but I think, if I may, I'd like to turn it over to Beth Beloff now to discuss other aspects of this.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I'd now like to just talk about what is community solar, but I'd also like to note that in that list that you just saw of the issues, those are the backbone of a community solar bill. If you've seen the bills that have been introduced in the past, those are the key issues that are addressed. So community solar simply refers to local solar arrays that are shared by individual community members who receive credit on their electricity bills for their portion of the power produced. They are subscribers. The array is connected, as you can see in the diagram, to the electrical grid, and it's connected at the distribution level. The electrons that a subscriber subscribes to go into that grid, but they do not go to the subscriber's property. The billing mechanism allows for a credit to the subscriber for their portion of power produced, but not the power that they actually use. So it's an offset. I just want to clarify that point. Next slide, please. Thank you. So you can see that community solar is currently happening in 20 states and Washington, D.C. Some form of program, either a full statewide program or limited number of pilot projects. So there's a track record nationally on how this works that we've drawn from in previous bills and we're drawing from on this. Next slide, please. And one of the interesting points and impetuses are jobs and economic development as a result of community solar. And this is just a summary based on a model developed by the National Renewable Energy Lab for New Mexico. It's a 3-year snapshot of what benefits might accrue. And it's looking at 200 megawatts, roughly 70 megawatts a year of distributed community solar installed between 21 and 23, so a 3-year window. And it shows on average that 200 megawatts would serve approximately 11,700 customers of a whole range of sizes. It also includes a 34% increase in solar jobs, 728 sustained full-time jobs initially during construction, $115.5 million in earnings for those employed across the solar supply chain, $240 million in local economic benefits for the state, and the above yields an average of $15 million per year of economic benefit each year during the 25-year minimum life of a solar project. And I just want to draw your attention to the diagram to the right of that, which breaks that down. So roughly 52% of the benefits are direct. They're from things like project development, design, permitting, construction, maintenance, and so on, directly related to the community solar development. 32% are for the indirects, the solar supply chain jobs, and 15% are called induced jobs, and that has more to do with reinvestment in the local economy through things like groceries, restaurant use, gas, and so on. Just a snapshot. Next slide, please. So, in addition to economic benefits, what are some of the underlying motivations or the values? Why do people want community solar? And we asked these questions in the initial meetings of the working group to really flesh out how this wide group of stakeholders felt about community solar. And they're summarized here. So one has to do with the cost of electricity, providing cost savings on utility bills, and that would be derived from cheaper cost of solar and the benefits that accrue from multiple participants sharing in the cost of a single large-scale solar array. The second is about ensuring reduction in costs, particularly for low-income subscribers, and giving low-income households access to community solar that they are not otherwise able to have in the way of rooftop or affordability if they have roofs. The third really has to do with ensuring that all reasonable costs of the community solar facilities are borne by the solar developers and not by non-participating ratepayers. This is particularly important to all of the stakeholders, that those who are buying into community solar are paying for it. And then a hedge against rising utility rates. The second area of high value motivations is simply that of access to solar and giving consumers choice. And it came up very high on the list of values for the stakeholders that there be equal access to the solar market for everyone in New Mexico. And especially for those who cannot utilize on-site solar. Renters, low-income households, those in multi-unit buildings, municipalities, nonprofits, and businesses. And as I mentioned, to provide consumer choice for one of a variety of options. Resilience and power reliability. So it's been shown that community solar can in fact help create more resilient electric grids. Developers are required to upgrade the distribution infrastructure upon their interconnect to enable that interconnection, and that boosts power on local lines, among other things. And it also can support utility efforts to maintain power reliability, especially when co-located with energy storage. Next slide, please. Competition and economic development. We've covered some of the numbers around economic development, but competition in the marketplace, which allows the private sector to participate, also helps stimulate innovation to increase competitive positioning and thereby drive down costs in community solar developments. Stimulate growth and economic development, particularly of the renewable energy marketplace. You saw the clean energy jobs that can be produced, and providing more opportunities, importantly, for local solar developers to participate in these projects, and provide opportunities for Indian nations to participate in the development of community solar on their lands. And you'll be hearing a lot more about that after me. Provide economic stimulus for farmers, landowners, rural communities, and small towns by both leasing or selling land for community solar facilities. And this is often where land is cheaper and where layering multiple uses on that land when reasonable makes sense for those rural communities. And lastly, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this we see as a way of complementing the Energy Transition Act, and by more rapidly introducing solar power and replacing fossil fuel generation in our state. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mayani Baruddin to speak about Tribal Community Solar Task Force.
Thank you, Beth. Buwatsi Hopa. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I am Mayani Baruddin, Interior West Manager and Tribal Liaison with Vote Solar. Vote Solar is a nonprofit that works to lower solar costs and expand solar access by advocating for state policy and programs which aid the renewable energy transition. I am also a tribal member of Giwa Pueblo, and I have long dreamt of having community solar across Giwa and the reservations of New Mexico as a form of culturally appropriate development to alleviate energy burden on tribal members and ratepayers. We also have been working to prioritize tribal consultation within this process, which we have highlighted so far and we'll get into now. We really want to ensure that tribes are able to benefit from community solar development, which led to the creation of the Tribal Community Solar Task Force. And if you're in charge of the slides, if you just click, everything will come up before advancing to the next slide. Sorry, there are animations on this one. So the Tribal Community Solar Task Force is a subgroup of the State Facilitated Working Group of Senate Memorial 63. We meet on alternating weeks, which I'll explain more about. And our goals and objectives are to develop tribal consultation and outreach processes to develop firm policy recommendations for the larger working group and for the interim legislative committees. We also continually prepare for and debrief from these working group meetings by really focusing on education and other foundational needs so that tribal liaisons, tribal governance, tribal NGOs, that we really understand what community solar is and what policy recommendations we need to be able to take advantage of community solar. Just one example of that is we have had guest speakers from Ute Mountain Ute Tribe talk about their community solar development process and how their community benefits now, starting from renewable energy feasibility study to securing funds through the Department of Energy, and how the tribe has really benefited as ratepayers and as a community. Just so you know, this task force is composed of designated tribal representatives, so people who have been designated by individual tribal governance, and also open to all tribal members or those acting on behalf of tribal interests across New Mexico. We understand that, especially with the global pandemic and how much our Native communities are hurting by it, we need a task force to help take some of that capacity and responsibility of the education and the technological background that is required of community solar. Of course, there's still open attendance for all who would like to participate. We really do seek to elevate tribal interests Also just have, as we mentioned, just the education. So part of this is, focusing on everything from examples of best practices to just understanding what community solar is, how it works, what it means in the tribes, and really understanding what our values are in comparison to the greater state. Next slide, please. This is just showing the schedule, just so you're aware. If you would like to sit in on any of the meetings, of course, you're more than welcome to. We do meet on alternate weeks of the Senate Memorial 63 Working Group. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we really do focus on education. So understanding what community solar is, how it will benefit, also just having, similar to the larger working group, starting off with a discussion of what the underlying wants and needs are. A big aspect of this is also the outreach. So we are in the process, a small subset of us are in the process of developing materials for tribal governance and for tribal leadership and other interests and other tribal entities about community solar with graphics that really suit our needs and our understanding and situate our tribal nations and communities within community solar. So that is another effort going on for outreach, making sure that the framing is right and that, tribes are understanding what the policy is before signing on, and that we can really seek that greater engagement. Key to this process is also learning possibilities from other tribes, as I mentioned, and national best practices. And that is used to develop policy recommendations. Since the task force is still running, our policy recommendations are set to be more finalized by October 28th, and we are actively working on those. A lot of them are revolving around the rural electric cooperative opt-in or opt-out process, talking about the tribal exemptions and tribal sovereignty, also what will best serve tribes in the rulemaking process, and other accessibility issues. Pilar Thomas has been extremely helpful in this process. Pilar, her expertise is in helping us craft these policy recommendations for the task force. Her practice is on tribal renewable energy project development and finance, tribal economic development, federal Indian law, and natural resource development. And I will turn it over to Pilar now. Thank you for allowing us the time here today. And Pilar, please, the next slides are yours. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and honorable representatives and senators. It's nice to be here. I'm happy to have been brought into the discussion. Just a little bit more on my background. I'm an attorney. Of course, I'm based out of Tucson, Arizona, but I'm a UNM law school grad, so very familiar with the New Mexico Pueblos and tribes, as well as the energy footprint in New Mexico. I've actually participated in a couple of previous state energy strategic planning efforts that I worked on when I was at the Department of Energy, and then provided some additional advisory assistance when I came back into private practice. I spent 4 years at the Department of Energy in the Office of Indian Energy, worked with several Pueblos, Navajo Nation, Hickory, Apache, when they were buying out their utility. So fortunately have a lot of familiarity with the current situation, what tribes in New Mexico have been trying to do for a long period of time. We provided technical assistance, for example, to Picarise when they were building out wanted to build out their 1 megawatt solar project. We gave them a grant for that project. So I've had the opportunity to work with several New Mexico Pueblos and tribes on their efforts. One of the things that I was able to kind of contribute to the tribal working group is understanding kind of where tribal authorities, both jurisdictional authorities and governance authorities, fit within the kind of the total framework of energy in the United States. And as you know, we have 3 levels of governments here. We have the federal government, tribal government, state governments, all independent of each other and all with different levels of authority under either federal law or state law or tribal law that will promote energy development, energy policy, etc. So part of the education process for the tribal working group is also to help, especially the tribal participants representing the tribal governments, the pueblos, on kind of how all this stuff fits together. And really, frankly, why are we as tribal nations in a state law anyway? And so, there's a lot of emphasis around tribes being separate from states. State law doesn't apply on Indian land. And so helping the tribes understand how, from an energy standpoint, especially the regulatory scheme, there's this interconnection between all three sovereigns and how this works. So I walked a little bit through, again, the federal jurisdiction, as the state representatives know and your regulatory commission knows. The federal government, there is no federal jurisdiction over local energy use, over the distribution systems, over retail utilities. But there is federal law that will have some impact on what the retail distribution utilities can do. And one of those key federal laws is under PURPA, stands for Public Utility Regulatory Policy Act. PURPA was one of the first laws to actually require public utilities, as defined in federal law, to actually interconnect small distributed energy systems and buy power from those what are called qualified facilities. And in the law, that's any facility, renewable energy facility, that's less than 80 megawatts. This PURPA has been used to proliferate small-scale solar projects throughout the West. And each state can control how PURPA gets implemented. But the heart of the federal law is a requirement to interconnect and a requirement to buy power. And that has been, as I said, a big impetus and some of the driving, in addition to tax credits and renewable portfolio requirements, having the PURPA hammer almost of requiring utilities to buy power has really led to the proliferation of smaller projects, 10 megawatt, 20 megawatt, 30 megawatt projects. And that's really kind of the gist of federal jurisdiction on what happens in the distribution system. On the tribal side, of course, tribal law controls what happens on tribal lands. So tribes can leverage their own authorities, their governance authorities, their jurisdictional authorities to control development and to control use. And while there may be some question around the scope of civil jurisdiction over, for example, non-Indian entities operating on Indian land, or I know that there are pockets of non-Indian land within the Pueblos, for example. Federal law will control all of that jurisdictional question, but the general rule is tribes have the jurisdiction over what occurs on tribal lands. So they can control their own development, they can control how their lands are being used, how their resources are being used. And then there's some federal laws that allow the tribes to take over, from a regulatory standpoint, some of that development. As you may know, if a tribe wants to lease their land or approve right-of-ways on their land, those leases and right-of-ways typically have to be approved by the Department of Interior. They go to the BIA, and that can really hinder development on tribal land. So a couple of federal laws have now authorized tribes to take on that regulatory process themselves and to not actually have to go to the BIA for approval of leases or right-of-ways. So that can facilitate development on tribal lands, and especially around energy projects. There is a little bit of a gray area when it comes, though, to state-regulated utilities and whether tribes have the jurisdiction to actually regulate utilities operating on Indian land. There have been a couple of court cases that have come out a couple of different ways on that question. But again, if the default rule is that tribes control what happens on Indian land, that would include that tribes can control utilities operating on Indian land. So a lot of times you'll see tribes, there are a handful of tribes that have their own utility codes, for example. that actually regulate the state regulated utility when it operates on Indian land. So those utilities have to come to the tribe to get their rates set. Those tribes, one tribe in particular, just did a net metering program and now requires their co-op to do net metering. So it's again, from a legal standpoint, there's some mixed case law, but more and more tribes are taking on regulation of utilities operating on Indian lands, primarily because they're not satisfied with what the utility is doing. And then, of course, on the state side, the state is responsible for regulating all the retail utilities. So they set the rates, they do their tariffs. The net metering programs in the state of New Mexico are all either based on state law or state regulation, all behind the meter, whether you have virtual or aggregate net metering, which we've heard is going to be required for community solar. They set the rules for PURPA. So when you have to buy power, they set the tariff rules for that. They authorize community solar. They might authorize other distributed energy programs. Your interconnection standards are typically set at the state level. And of course, your siting and off reservation zoning. Next slide. So the other benefit that I was able to bring, I hope, was to help folks understand kind of what's going on elsewhere. And some of the models that tribes have developed in working with not just projects on their own lands, but working with their states and their utilities as an example of how you can build a relationship, you can get the state to be maybe a little bit more aware of what's going on Indian lands. So some examples that we all know about Picarise up in the northern part of the state with their 1 megawatt community scale solar. That's not a community solar project as defined in the legislation, but it is a community scale project. And they have an agreement with Kit Carson. It took them a couple of years to negotiate that, but they were able to negotiate a net metering offset for the Pueblo. For the 1 megawatt of solar power being produced. That's very similar to what happens in California. So the Soboba Band, Rincon Band, Ramona Band are 3 California tribes who also have similarly scaled solar projects that are also net metered offset. And for each of them, they had to negotiate with their utilities. Rincon was pretty easy. Soboba, it took about 1.5 years. Ramona was pretty easy. But what has been kind of what the key similarities between these examples is that the utilities in California, because there's nothing in the state law that says anything about tribes. So the net metering and virtual net metering authorities under state law don't explicitly apply to the tribes. So when the tribes were negotiating these net metering, virtual net metering programs, the utilities, one, weren't sure they actually had to do it. And then they can kind of set their own terms because there was no state law or regulation to control that. So these tribes spent a lot of time and money trying to negotiate these agreements with their utilities in a one-off situation. Now, the state has started to change its view in California. The CPUC, for example, has now started to implement regulations that explicitly include tribes, that require the utilities that they regulate, which are their IOUs, like PNM, that require them to negotiate with the tribes on the same footing that they would with other governments. So the state itself, from a regulatory standpoint, is trying to correct this problem of each tribe individually trying to negotiate with its utility and creating a statewide rule for the utilities to negotiate with the tribes on the same basis that they negotiate with state and local governmental entities. And the last big example I gave was Blue Lake Rancheria, also in California. And they're the only tribe in the country that has operating microgrids. And the difference between kind of community scale solar, community solar, and microgrids is microgrids are completely self-sufficient. So these 2 microgrids on Blue Lake can be islanded from the big grid. Recently, as you may be aware, California with their wildfire issue, the utilities are authorized off power and to de-energize power lines when they have high wind events or when they have wildfires. So people will go without power. Blue Lake is in a small little valley. There's one line in. And so they developed the microgrids as a resiliency solution. They were, a few months ago, they made Washington Post, they were the only game in town generating power when PG&E had to shut off power to the Eureka, California neighborhood. And so residents from all over the region were able to come to Blue Lake Rancheria, store important medicines because their coolers were still working, get gas because their gas station was still working. They put vulnerable senior citizens up in their hotel because the hotel still had power. No one else had power in the neighborhood. No one except Blue Lake. They're a certified American Red Cross shelter center because of it. So these are some examples of what tribes are doing here in the West, mostly in California, but because the state is changing its view about how to interact with tribes. Let me end as well on kind of the virtual and aggregate net metering. So virtual net metering, which is a part of the solar community solar legislation now, allows for off-site renewable energy systems to produce credits. So you saw the model, and then those credits are shared across or allocated to one or more meters. So those meters in the community solar are the individuals who subscribe. But there's a complementary corollary net metering program called aggregate net metering. And that's in effect what Picarise has. So that's where you have one or more ratepayers. So in Picarise, it's the tribal members who are one or more ratepayers. They aggregate their meters and then allow their energy to be offset with an energy system. Now, community solar will have a combination of these two. But typically the on or off-site renewable energy system and aggregate net metering might be, let's say you have a government building, that's the kind of the anchor building, and they have the renewable energy project connected to that, but the government has multiple sites. And so they'll aggregate the multiple sites and they'll offset it against the other solar projects that's sitting against, one of the other buildings. So combine these two types of net metering, which most states allow, and which really has been the key to promoting distributed energy, community solar, community scale solar, and microgrids in tribal communities, because it allows the tribe to aggregate all of its tribal members' meters and then offset their use with the one big 1 megawatt project that they've done. And so that's how all these tribes in California and Picarise structure is actually set up. So it's important to allow for that if you're going to try and promote more energy development across a community like a Pueblo, that you can identify everybody and you want to help offset their power costs with a larger scale project. I think that's it for me. Is there any, what was the next slide? Yep, thank you.
Hello again, and thank you, Pilar. As Pilar has shared, this is her expertise with the task force has really shown us what the future of community solar could look like for tribal communities in New Mexico based upon these considerations. And this is actually a video if you press play, but this is the framework which the task force is using to develop our policy recommendations to share with the Senate Memorial 63 Working Group. As you can see, it contains considerations, the task force recommendations, rationale behind those recommendations for legal foundations, and example bill language. Once the task force finalizes these policy recommendations in our next meeting on October 28th, this will be shared with tribal leadership along with other outreach and supplemental materials for support through a sign-on letter. And like I mentioned earlier, this will reflect concerns of rural co-ops, tribal exemptions, the rulemaking process, and other accessibility issues. And please let me know if you have any questions about this specifically. I can drop my email in the chat, and I think it's time for question and answers now. And thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And do we have any questions from any members in the chamber? Representative Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for the panel presenting. Last year, this bill didn't have support from the nonprofit co-ops, which serve rural New Mexico, and they did not have support from the IOUs, which serve the larger cities. My question to this group is, what are you changing in your policy to hopefully get their support or get them to support you?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at answering that. First of all, last year's legislation had an opt-out provision. We've been having discussions with the co-ops directly that has addressed their concern about opt-out. And so I think the very authentic and deep discussions that we've had with co-ops has resulted in a resolution that NEMRICA put together and has presented to us. And that's being reviewed by that will be reviewed by the working group shortly. And they seem to be much more interested in agreeing to an opt-in provision. There are also conversations that will take place between the utilities and the IOUs and co-ops with the tribal task force as to how those relationships would work. With respect to the IOUs, as Paul mentioned, we have indeed been having conversations with the IOUs. We had quite a long listening session with PNM and with Xcel Energy. And we're hoping to overcome some of their objections. Whether that will happen with the IOUs is not clear, but we will certainly summarize how the majority of working group stakeholders feel about various issues, and where there's a disagreement from the IOUs that can't be resolved, we will make very clear where those differences of opinion fall. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And I don't know how much you guys know about me, but my background is I'm an electrical engineer. I have my master's and bachelor's. I have an MBA. I took graduate level accounting, and I also ran Jemez Mountains Electric, the largest co-op in the state. We served 5 counties, 8 pueblos, part of the Navajo Nation, part of the Jicarilla Apache Nation. Last year, I opposed this bill because it would increase electricity rates. Is your new legislation, will this new legislation increase electricity rates? Because I represent Mora and Rio Arriba, which are some of the poorest counties in the state. And I know, just to throw out a number, $5 a month might not mean a lot to some people, but a lot of people live in mobile homes. They live in rural areas where propane's real expensive. They don't have access to natural gas, so they need electric heat. So I guess my concern last year, and I haven't seen the new legislation, so I don't know, and that's why I'm asking, but will this new legislation increase electricity rates?
So I'd be happy to answer that, and feel free, Mayani as well, to jump in if you can, or Senator Stefanik's representative, Roybal Caballero. We are making every effort that there not be cross-subsidization, that the costs of community solar fall to the subscribers. If those costs are higher than the current utility rates, then the developer won't be able to get subscribers. So the intention of the effort, as has been expressed in our breakout groups and the working groups, is that the costs of community solar will be borne by the developers and whatever portion of that passed on to subscribers, and that ratepayers will not bear the cost of community solar.
And I guess I'm a Democrat and part of our platform is protecting the low income and the middle class. So the last thing I want to see is increased rates. So I hope whatever you put forward does not increase rates. And I know you brought up the tribes earlier. You gave good examples of how they're already doing a lot of great projects like Pico East with Kit Carson. So they're already doing stuff like this. I guess what additional, how is your legislation gonna help tribes? Like you talked about example projects, but these are projects that tribes are already doing. So what is this potential legislation gonna do to help the tribes?
Hi, this is Pilar Thomas. I'm happy to provide maybe some context on that. So, again, as I said earlier, Pico East had to negotiate with Kit Carson. Kit Carson didn't have to negotiate with Pico East. They didn't have to do the project the way they did it. They had no binding legal responsibility to do it. And in fact, Kit Carson was on the cusp of them starting to move to a more renewable energy friendly footprint. Something similar happened in California, where again, the utilities were not required by state regulation or state law to negotiate with the tribes. And the state, because the state legislation was silent as to the tribes. And so it was only until the CPUC started enforcing and writing into their regulation that the utilities had to negotiate with the tribes the same footing they were negotiating with local governments, that you started to see more energy development in California. So while it can be done, like Pico East did it, you have 19 pueblos, 3 tribes, to require each of them to individually negotiate with their utilities to do that is very inefficient and very expensive for the tribes. So having state legislation or state regulation that requires the utilities to do these projects with the tribes is going to decrease costs. The more expensive you make the project, the more expensive is the power. So one of the benefits of community solar is it drives down the cost of developing solar projects. The cheaper the project, the cheaper the power. So if you want to reduce costs for the ratepayers, these projects have to be as cheap as possible. Well, if you require every individual tribe to negotiate with every individual utility on an individual basis, you're just going to drive up costs, and that's not going to result in cheaper power. So that's one of the things to keep in mind is in order for the utilities to treat the tribes, in some cases more fairly, not every utility is doing what Kit Carson has done. There's lots of co-ops in New Mexico who do not don't necessarily have a good working relationship with their pueblos or the tribes they service. And so to put the tribes in the position of having to individually negotiate rather than having a uniform rule across the state that everybody has to follow, which has predictability in it, which has certainty in it, that will help the developers because they know I don't have to worry about a tribe. If a tribe says, I want to do a 2 megawatt project and the developer's got to worry about will the utility let them do it or not do it. And then you got to spend 2 years negotiating, very expensive. So the uniformity that the state law brings, the fairness and non-discriminatory approach that the state law brings will drive down costs, will create certainty for tribes and developers and others. And that's really critical to seeing more energy development. If you have the one-off circumstance like you've seen elsewhere, then it just doesn't happen because it's too expensive. So that's one of the biggest benefits to ensuring that the tribes get treated equally and that there's uniformity across the state, that you have that included in the legislation.
Madam Chair, just a closing comment. I went through a process where we sold our utilities on the Jicarilla Apache Nation lands to the Jicarilla because they established their own utility. Tribes have the right to take over lines anytime they want. So I know you mentioned there's a lot of negotiations going back and forth what more leverage do you need than saying, well, we'll take over your lines? And that's their right, and they should have that right. But I guess my concern, you keep mentioning low-cost community solar. When I have experience where I was analyzing projects for my co-op, which had 30,000 customers, and like I said, serve 5 counties, and we looked at utility scale projects, and we looked at community solar. Community solar was 3 times the cost of a utility scale project. So that's why I had heartburn last year with this legislation. It's more expensive. You have to administer the program. You have to upgrade the system to handle this. You have to update your building system. My only concern is that these things aren't getting considered. And I look forward to seeing the new legislation and to see what creative things you guys have come up with to get around these things. Because like I mentioned, my priority is not raising rates on people, most importantly, low-income people. And I know last year there was an appropriation to help offset that cost. I don't know if you guys are going to put an appropriation this year, but I look forward to seeing this legislation, and thank you for your presentation.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Senator.
It's Senator Stefanik and Representative Sanchez. Thank you so much for that question. We have discussed including in the bill a section that would allow outside funds, outside of the state funds, to come into a fund just to assist in development of projects for low income and moderate income benefit. So we are very conscious of not raising rates. And in order to allow non-state money to come in, like from a foundation or from the federal government, we need to create some enabling legislation. So we have talked about the need for something like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I have Senator Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone for your presentation. Ms. Thomas, I was very impressed with yours. I mean, you kind of put me through a schooling in the class here, not being an engineer or a utility person, but more of a business person, and I look at it from that point of view. Ms. Thomas, what is the difference between, and would it affect anything between a California tribe and a New Mexico tribe? Isn't there some federal law that designates a type of tribe in New Mexico, like I know what the legislation is, different from what California is, where they have rancherias, and I don't know what else they call them over there. Where here we have what we call reservations.
There's no federal law difference between the two. There is there's a federal law, PL something -280. I never remember what the Congress number is. We just call them PL 280 states. And California is a PL 280 state, which creates some level of jurisdiction that the state has over Indian lands in California. But it doesn't include like state regulatory laws. It's mostly criminal law and related to that. From a federal law perspective, there's no difference between Pueblo lands, which as we know are held in fee, in common for the Pueblo, but they're still considered Indian lands, trust lands. They're still treated that way by the federal government. The rancherias are the same. Some of them are allotted in California, but most aren't anymore. And in fact, I think there's a lot of similarities between, especially the smaller tribes of California and the Pueblos of New Mexico, in that very small land masses. So even though the Pueblos are a league square or even sometimes greater, and you've got part of Navajo, there's still a lot of tribes in California who are small like the Pueblos. They have small land masses. They have a small number of tribal members. They might be in mostly an urban or very urban adjacent environment, like the Pueblos around Albuquerque. and you have a lot of rancherias or even reservations like that in the San Diego area. So there's a lot of similarities, I think, between the two sets. And that's why for the working group, I've pointed mostly to California to see what small tribes have been doing with limited people, limited resources, relatively small loads. Even those smaller tribes like Blue Lake has a casino and a hotel, maybe a 3 megawatt load on the Blue Lake Rancheria. That might be comparable to Piccaries. Piccaries had, I think, maybe a 1 megawatt load. So they're really small loads. If you got a big casino like Sandia Casino, that's a 15 megawatt load. You're gonna maybe have a different solution there, but there's a lot of tribes in California that have big resorts like Sandia has. So there's a lot of similarity because of size, number of tribal members, kind of locations, combination rural, urban, and the types of economic development that are occurring. And so that's why I've tended to point for the examples for New Mexico of what California has done and what the tribes in California have done, because you have similar profiles in that way. And so from a federal standpoint, there's no difference. From a state standpoint, there's a big difference. And there's similarities in profiles, if you will.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Thomas. Yeah, we have some very small pueblos and we have some very large ones. I represent Acoma and Laguna. My wife is an Acoma tribal member, and they're very large. I mean, when I say large, even in their population, but also their landmass. So they're pretty large. One of the slides had rural electric co-op opt-in, opt-out. Can someone explain what that means?
Beth, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Opt out, as it was put in the bill, House Bill 9 last time, would mean that the co-op would have to justify as to why it was not able to provide community solar. What were the restrictions? What were the requirements that they couldn't overcome? And that was seen by co-ops as a significant obstacle. Use of resources to have to justify, argue in front of the PRC as to why they could not produce community solar. Opt-in, on the other hand, removes a lot of that onus. The co-ops are still responsible to their memberships. So if the members want community solar, then that would be an internal discussion, but it wouldn't be an external one to justify why they cannot join in community solar. So the co-ops much prefer opt-in. They feel that is a better use of their resources to work directly with their memberships and make a determination as to whether it makes sense for their co-op to opt in. Mayani, you may want to address that as well.
I can just elaborate a bit more on why this is of concern. And as Beth mentioned in House Bill 9, it was an opt-out where the co-ops did have to provide justification. A lot of that was based upon that self-generation capacity and contracts with their wholesale provider. The reason this is a big concern for the task force and the tribes is because 13 of New Mexico's 19 pueblos are in co-op service territory, and large portions of Jicarilla, Mescalero, and Navajo Nation. So we really want to make sure that we are looking at both sides of the coin and making sure that, as we mentioned, co-op ratepayers are not impacted by community solar, but at the same time that tribes are able to access it, especially in recognition of how large of a constituency are served by the co-ops. And a lot of that is within Jemez Mountain and Continental Divide. And as you know, Senator Sanchez, we need to make sure that we are able to Look at both sides of the coin for why this is a key discussion, especially this year, and making sure that we have enough time to really focus in on it, coordinate with the co-ops directly and with the tribal nations directly as well.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your answers. I think there needs to be some cooperation. There needs to be some discussion on that. And you talked about the, communication and that. How do you feel? I don't know who wants to answer this about community involvement. When I say community, when I'm talking about the co-ops, not the IOUs, when you have membership, when there's been some surveys as to something similar to this or taking over lines and that, when the survey that I participate in as a member of the co-op, and not only here, but also a member with the house that my wife has on the Pueblo, where the over majority of the community in the survey chose to stay the same with the co-op rather than going with the utility at the tribal level. It was like 68% of tribal members voted to stay the way it is, and 70% of the regular membership throughout the co-op, or vice versa, I can't remember. But they're real close in numbers. How do you feel the community should be involved? The question in this. And on top of that, why would the state or anyone need to be involved with the tribe just do community solar on their own? Why would the state need to be involved? They need to protect their sovereignty, the tribes, and they can make their own decisions on their land, as was mentioned before. This might be two separate questions there, but
I can defer to the first one. I answer the first one and defer to Pilar on the second one. But on the first point, in terms of surveys and membership, a lot of the focus this year, in tandem with the task force, is actually on education and outreach and making sure that tribal membership and tribal leadership understand what community solar is. And that's through development of infographics and other social media pushes. For tribal leadership, that's also we're in the process of developing toolkits so that we really cater to tribal audiences and explanation of community solar so that it's understood within cultural terms, but also within terminology with New Mexico in consideration of their local cooperatives. And that's one of the larger pushes, is making sure that when we're talking about community solar, people really understand what we're talking about and it's not just given to them. I will defer to Pilar on the second one of why we do need a state mandate so that it is easier and more, as Pilar mentioned earlier, non-discriminatory, more accessible, so that tribes can partake in community solar through a state mandate.
Yeah, so as I had mentioned in to the previous question as well about, why can't tribes just do their own utilities, or Picarise did it without legislation, so why do we need legislation now? And it really is because the state regulates not the tribe or what's happening on tribal land, but it regulates the utilities. And so in the absence of a state law or state regulation telling the utilities what they have to do, the utilities have discretion to do what they want to do. And so that's where the challenge becomes. So a tribe could do a community solar project, but when it goes to the utility, the co-op or PNM, to interconnect, then PNM can say, not going to do it, or I'm going to charge you $2 million to do it. Or the co-op could say, sorry, bumping up against our 5% contract limit, or whatever ceiling they now have on mostly renewable power because of their long-term contracts. Or we can't put it there because the system would need to be fully upgraded, right? And so there's a combination of legal obstacles, there's a combination of discretionary decision-making, And certainly there's technical challenges. And so, you know, if you have a technically challenged project, it's not going to get done. But the goal is that if I have a viable project that I'm interested in as a Pueblo or as a tribe, that's going to benefit my tribal members, it will probably benefit the whole system, because that's one of the big studies that are constantly being done around distributed energy, is how they benefit the whole system. So if I might have a real viable, financially viable, technically viable project, but I have a co-op that says, sorry, don't want to do it, and I don't have to do it, then it doesn't get done, even though it's on Indian land. So that's why the state legislation is important, to have this, again, uniform process, uniform requirements, so that Jemez Mountain Co-op can't take one position, and Continental Divide take another position, and Kit Carson take a third position. They're all having to follow the same rules with respect to how to do projects on tribal lands.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Thomas. And my question, my next question was going to be, why would the tribe need to negotiate with the utility company? And that is for the interconnect, which you mentioned there. Is that the reason? That's the reason you negotiate with the utility?
Yes, it's going to be the interconnection, because you've got to plug the system into the grid. It may even be, even if you do the system on a building, you still have to get the utilities permission to do that. So you're interconnecting to their system in some way. So that's one approval you've got to get. The other approval is going to be around tariffs and rates. So, because you've got these net metering requirements, right? So I'm going to produce power, and I'm going to put that power into your system, and then I'm going to use power. And so I'm going to pay you for the power I use, and you're going to pay me for the power I produce. And so that offsetting is the virtual net metering that was discussed here. So that net metering is an offsetting process. So the utilities may have a net metering program that's approved by the utility, but if this is a community solar project that it doesn't fall within the net metering parameters, then you're negotiating on your own. So that's how the transaction costs can get very high in all of this. So those are the two key ways that you're negotiating with a utility, to interconnect into their system, and then to negotiate the tariffs and the offsetting rates for you producing power, and then offsetting that with the power that you use.
Okay, so, and my last question here is, okay, so take, for example, and I'm not an engineer, I don't know any, I find this conversation today very fascinating, especially how you're educating me, Ms. Thomas, on a lot of this that I don't know. But say, for example, a tribe builds a solar array, and are they pretty much not, I won't say the grid, but if the tribe has taken over, as Representative Sanchez mentioned, the transmission lines and the service lines, would there still need to be negotiating with the state? Can you you're producing the power as the tribe and putting it onto your own system?
Tribes can certainly do that. And so Representative Sanchez was correct that in Jicarilla did it, Acama's doing it. Acama's standing up their own utility. They've already stood up their own utility as well. A lot of tribes have developed their own utilities. There's about 40 tribes around the country that have their own operating utilities. Utilities are expensive. And as was just represented, when Jemez Mountain was looking at all these upgrades and all the technical amendments and technical fixes that might have to be done, that there is no doubt you have those technical challenges, but utilities can be expensive to operate. And so it may serve as a lever in the negotiation, but Jicarilla, had to condemn that property, which cost money to do. And then they had to take it over. Then they had to do all the upgrades themselves. And yes, they can control the utility. They can control what goes onto the system there because they own it now. When Acama takes full ownership and operations of their utility, they can put solar projects there and they control it. But not every tribe has the capacity to stand up a utility or the capability to do it. Not every tribe wants to invest the time, money, and effort to do that, but they still want to take advantage of community solar or other distributed energy that will reduce the cost of power for their members. And so having to go to a full operating utility is the most expensive way to do that.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. As I said, I find this conversation pretty fascinating, very interesting. As a senator, I never saw any legislation over in, other than I never saw any legislation in the Senate, so I was never able to vote on any of the community solar bills. I don't know how far they made it. I chair corporations, and it never came to my committee or to the floor. So I find this very fascinating. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for your presentation.
I'd just like to add one quick note on that. Many tribes actually are in good standing with their cooperatives as well, and a large focus is on the right-of-ways, but at the same time, tribes are key ratepayers and cooperative members. A lot of these big facilities do really add to the cooperative rate profit, the rate base, especially the casinos and the larger facilities. And part of this effort is to also, in light of that good standing, in light of in operating in quote unquote good faith. So that is another consideration in the development of this policy, is that it is, as Pilar said, the most expensive way to form their own utilities. But at the same time, I don't think many co-ops would want to lose their tribal membership as well.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from other members? No? Thank you presenters for your presentation. And when we talk about business within New Mexico, any kind of investment, anything that started up, there's going to be some cost that has to be in the beginning at a loss before you regain it all, as far as I see it. But as a legislator, I think we do have an obligation to our New Mexicans to bring solar forth, because I think that is the future in some sense, to bringing energy and driving down costs in some manner, although, it is fairly new in some sense. And once we get going, I think that we will recapture a lot of that. So with that, I think it also opens doors within these small communities. When you talked about the Blue Lake project, and when we talk about the police body cams and storing data, I don't see why we don't use that too as an economic development idea, because we don't have all these natural, weather events in New Mexico. And if it can be in a secure area in some of these places, if they can provide that, that would be great. I think it is an open business, and any business that comes into it, you have to be vested in the community and be responsive to especially in New Mexico, to the community members and the ruralness. And for some of the areas on the reservation, it seems like that would be the most feasible in developing those small areas, because they don't want to put a line that's so many miles and there's only a few subscribers. The more subscribers, the more likely they will do it. But when we talk about some communities that are way out there on the reservation, they do need power, they do need energy, and we see even more prevalent now. I don't know if we're leveraging the money that we're getting from COVID towards it, because in order to provide broadband or internet access to those communities, they need energy to turn on their computers and just have those small luxuries of life of cooling, having a refrigerator. So I hope we keep all those things in mind, and also like to see something in the presentation as far as if we're leveraging, and where is it coming from, and is there other ways we could create something to continue to move forward, both for the co-ops and these projects. I don't know if you want to comment on what I said.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned, we are looking at a section that could enable outside funds to assist these projects. We are not writing any legislation yet because we are still in the working group process, and we want to make sure that we get through all the topics we promised everyone that we would discuss with them before we draft anything. And I would say, I should have said this at the beginning, we would love anyone to sign on as a co-sponsor with us. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative
Madam
Roybal
Chair, if I
Caballero.
may ask?
Yes, go ahead, sir,
Yes,
Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for your comments. They're very important, and we have been entertaining as well within the discussions of the working group, but also, we have a tremendous amount of opportunity even within our own state oversight financing capacity to also leverage. So there are ways in which to attract pools, investment pools and other pools at very low cost, if not no cost. And the New Mexico Finance Authority has access to a number of these types of funds that make it very attractive to developers to develop in our small rural communities, and also to address what Representative Sanchez had addressed, and that is to ensure, because if we can leverage financing for these projects, then as what Ms. Thomas mentioned, the lower the cost, the lower the rates, the power, and the cost of power. And it starts a residual of lower, so that by the time the ratepayer, it gets to the ratepayer, then we're at the affordability factor, which is what we're all looking for, because we're not only talking about accessibility, but it obviously has to be accessible because our communities are crying out for us to use our natural resources such as wind and solar, and to stop, abusing the earth, and so that we can address certain aspects of climate change as well. So when our communities are crying out for this, then it forces us to have to look at ways in which we can be creative and innovative. And so to address not only Representative Sanchez's comments about wanting to ensure that the members and ratepayers, this absolutely is a consumer-directed piece of legislation if we get to that point. It has been up to now, and hopefully the working group will produce some good, viable, innovative, and creative ways for us to continue to look at it. But it is actually consumer, from a consumer standpoint, because ultimately we want to educate our communities to be able to utilize and depend upon renewable energies, and capturing our sun in the state is absolutely imperative. And then we also want to be able to make it lucrative to where developers, no matter at what level you are, have the ability to offer it, which makes it accessible, and then offer it at a low cost, which makes it affordable all the way across. So we are having these kind of extensive discussions around the state, and we've been getting very good input from the individuals in the working group, as well as from our constituents around the state that are monitoring and watching this piece this working group unfold in hopes of a really good, viable piece of legislation that we welcome our colleagues to join us in. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you for your presentation, Senator Stefanik. Thank you, Representative Roybal Caballero, Pilar, Beth, Paul, Mayun. Am I saying that? And thank you for, I don't know if you have any closing comments on this, but thank you very much. You do? Go ahead.
No, Madam Chair, we don't want to keep you from the weekend.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much. And thank you all the other legislators for joining us today. I think it was a very good agenda that we had put together, And I believe, do we have any public comment? And we don't have any public comment, so we will adjourn for today, and we'll see you again on our next to last meeting. Have a great one. Stay healthy, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, to all the panelists, Senator Rodriguez, and to our staff, thank you.